of you. And we would like to welcome you all to the SCE Community Lecture Series. Today we are lucky to have with us Dr. Helen Rizzo, the Associate Professor at the Sociology in the School of Humanities and Social Science, who will be presenting to us a very interesting topic: education and social change. Does civil society matters? Dr. Rizzo received her PhD in sociology from the Ohio State University in 2000. She has published numerous articles on public opinions and books, citizenship, rights, and the democratization process in Kuwait. Dr. Rizzo has also volunteered in the Egyptian Center for Women's Rights campaign titled Making Our Streets Safe for Everyone. She's currently the Sociology and Anthropology Graduate Program Director in the Department of Sociology, Anthropology, Psychology, and Egyptology at the American University in Cairo. Without further ado, please welcome with me Dr. Helen Rizzo.
Screen. I don't need it right this second, so I'll begin. Thank you all for coming tonight, and I especially want to thank Alia for her kind invitation, and Hela, all of her logistical work for the lecture series. And I also want to thank Dean Dina Borai, who's not here with us tonight, for inviting me, and the School of Education for organizing this series. When Dean Dina asked me in September if I would speak in a lecture series on self-development through lifelong learning, she suggested the topic of the individual's role in their social mobility. At first I was hesitant because, as a sociologist who studies inequality, I don't really look at individuals in terms of personality or self-development, and I wouldn't have anything inspiring to say about the role of formal education in Egypt in affecting an individual's social mobility. Well, on the contrary, I could give you a whole lecture on the various factors that impede individual social mobility in Egypt, which include the state of formal education, which definitely did not fit in the theme of this lecture series. So instead, I decided to focus on other research that I do besides inequality, where I look at civil society, social movements, and non-governmental organizations and their relationships to social change. And I realized that if I took a broader view of education, that I could share with you today some of the findings from my research on civil society in Egypt, including some of the successes of the work of the groups I have studied have been in educating the public on a very serious social problem that needs to be addressed. And through their work, they have also been able to facilitate self-development and lifelong learning opportunities, not only for the general public, but for the groups themselves, their staff, activists, and volunteers who have become the backbone of the initiatives that I will be discussing today. So I'm going to talk in particular about two groups that I have been following. They have been initiatives or campaigns against sexual harassment in Egypt. I followed two initiatives in particular: the NGO, the Egyptian Center for Women's Rights, which I'll refer to as ECWR, their campaign against public space harassment that began in 2005. And then in 2007, the campaign was named Making Our Streets Safer for Everyone, as mentioned before. So I followed this campaign, and at times was a participant in the campaign from 2006 to 2010, so before the 2011 uprising. And then I also look at one of the first initiatives in Egypt to focus exclusively on sexual harassment, Harass Map, which began in 2010, and I was a consultant on a research project with them from 2012 to 2014 which I will discuss later in the talk. So before I go into the details of the contributions of these groups to social change and lifelong learning, I would like to define the key terms in today's presentation. So as I said, I want to take a broader view of education than the process of giving or receiving formal instruction, or in other words, what is taught and learned in formal educational institutions. Instead, I want to focus on the parts of the definition that education can also mean an enlightening experience, as well as engaging in activities that produce, transfer, acquire, and apply knowledge. It is also important to understand what I mean when I use the term civil society. For those of you who are not familiar with the term, it is a voluntary sector of organizations, social movements, and interest groups that provide a means for organized citizen action. A key part of civil society around the world has been non-governmental organizations, defined by the World Bank as groups and institutions that are entirely or largely independent of governments and characterized by humanitarian or cooperative rather than commercial objectives. Private organizations that pursue activities to relieve suffering, promote the interests of the poor, protect the environment, or undertake community development. I would also like to add that many of these NGOs and informal initiatives and social movements also work for social justice, which includes issues such as women's rights, human rights, civil rights, ending discrimination against minority groups, etc. So thus, civil society is separate from the state or the public sector, as well as separate from for-profit business commercial enterprises or the private sector. So first, I want to look at the role of civil society in actually producing knowledge. I argue that one of the greatest successes of some of the civil society groups in Egypt has been in their abilities to produce knowledge based on high-quality research and disseminating the knowledge through reports, the media and press releases, conferences, and workshops. Some examples that stand out in my mind have been the Egyptian Initiative for Personal Rights, NASRA for Feminist Studies, and the two groups that I'm going to be discussing in detail today, ECWR and Harass Map. So I wanted to start with ECWR, and I just wanted to show you their website, but I don't know why the projector's no longer working. Sure. Okay. Well, this is just so if you want to get more information about the Egyptian Center for Women's Rights, and they also have their website in both English and Arabic, and they have, you can find the findings of some of their studies here on their website. So I just wanted to show you their online face. So I wanted to start with them because their campaign, or they were one of the first women's rights NGOs to take on the issue of everyday public space harassment. In 1996, ECWR was established in a lower class neighborhood of Cairo, Dar es Salaam, by 6 women, including lawyers from the Egyptian Organization for Human Rights. Its mission was providing legal aid to poor women and training them to understand and utilize their political and legal rights. ECWR's agenda quickly broadened, and in September of 2005, ECWR began a project against street harassment after hearing numerous stories of women experiencing intensive sexual harassment on the streets and in public places, including touching, indecent exposure, commenting, staring, aggressive language, etc. ECWR feared that the problem had become so prevalent that women were not able to move freely in public spaces because of feeling unsafe. To quote ECWR in 2005, "Since the seriousness of this form of violence and its consequences on women's social and political participation is great, we feel we cannot stand by silently and allow this to continue." So the ECWR leadership decided that the first step of this campaign was to collect data to demonstrate to government agencies, policy and lawmakers, and the general public that harassment was a serious social phenomena rather than a set of isolated incidents where individual women could be blamed for their dress, behavior, or being overly sensitive to so-called harmless flirtation. So in November 2005, ECWR developed a survey to assess the prevalence, type, and severity of harassment by asking women to share their experiences of harassment and its consequences. So they distributed numerous surveys between autumn 2005 and through 2006 and held focus group and interview sessions with Egyptian women and men and foreign women of varying social classes. So at first, the survey was distributed via email lists and websites. Then it was administered at AUC with the assistance of AUC's Office of Equal Opportunity and Affirmative Action and the BOSI Project, a student feminist group that had started at AUC. The survey was also given to the refugee community in Cairo through the Egyptian branch of the British NGO African and Middle East Refugee Assistance, also known as AMIRA. So AMIRA then held discussions about harassment in refugee group meetings. The surveys and focus groups revealed problems with enforcing existing laws. One of the problems they found was proof was essential for filing a police report. Police officers often were not trained in dealing with crimes of a sexual nature. The general public was ignorant of existing laws, and only 12% of those surveyed reported problems to the police. They also uncovered reasons for why victims would be reluctant to deal with harassment or report harassment. Some included police trivialization of their complaints or feeling that they were being stigmatized because they had been harassed, the reluctance of witnesses to become involved, a lack of confidence in the system of justice, and perpetuation of harassment involving the police themselves. So surveys continued in subsequent waves, including improving the questionnaire and sampling methods as ECWR gained experience, and they also began working with social scientists from both the national universities and the American University in Cairo on the research aspect of their campaign. The results of the last survey reported in fall 2008 report Clouds in Egypt's Skies was particularly powerful in mobilizing public opinion when it was released. And I'll talk more about how it was released and the impact it had. But another outcome from the early surveys and focus groups was that the participants in the research, it also raised their awareness, and then many of them asked to volunteer in the campaign. So many of the participants in the research began volunteering at ECWR, which was definitely for ECWR an unintended consequence of the research process. So during the campaign's first 18 months, it was run almost exclusively by the volunteers, both men and women. They provided new ideas such as awareness days, which attracted attendance through using the arts. The volunteers gained experiences, network, respect, skills at solving problems, and personal empowerment. So the amount of volunteer interest in this campaign made it possible for ECWR to broaden its advocacy activities beyond conducting roundtables and conferences. And both the chair of ECWR and the volunteers agreed that the innovativeness and creativity in the campaign was unprecedented and unique among NGO activities in Egypt. The second group that I am focusing on, Harass Map, and I'll show you their webpage and I'll talk more about the map for those of you who are familiar with their work. Harass Map was an outgrowth of this extensive research into sexual harassment that was conducted by ECWR and as part of their Safe Streets campaign. So two key figures working with ECWR and involved in the campaign were Rebecca Cho and Angie Roslan. And they were both driven by the shocking findings of ECWR's research, but also they were driven by their own frequent personal experiences of harassment in Egypt. So this motivated them to set up an independent initiative dedicated entirely to challenging this social endemic and ending the social acceptability of this phenomena. So after forming links with other organizations doing comparable work related to sexual harassment, Chow and Roslan met two other women, Amal Fahmy and Sao Sangad, who also shared their outlook on solving the problem. So together, they became the four co-founders of HerasMap, which was launched in 2010, only a month prior to the 2011 uprising. So as Egypt's first ever independent initiative using media technology to combat sexual harassment, one of the first parts of their campaign that they launched was developing this map that you see. Oh, I should use the laser pointer. And I don't know why I can't get rid of that box. So they developed this map. Right now I have it on Cairo, but if you go on their website, you can zoom out, and it also has a map of all of Egypt and trying to kind of map hotspots of sexual harassment. So let me zoom out so you can see that. Oops. So it's not just limited to Cairo. And I don't know why I can't get this box to go away. So I'll zoom more into Cairo again. And you can see what's going on right around where we are at this very moment. So how this map was created, it involves what's called, or they collect the data through crowdsourcing, which means that, so when they collect this data, then they have created this map to try to identify the hotspots. And the way that they collect the data is that women are encouraged to report incidents of harassment anonymously via email, Twitter, Facebook. They have an SMS hotline number, which you'll can find on the website, or even making a phone call. And this then becomes the data that is used to regularly update the map. So while the original purposes of the map was to provide a safe space for those who experience sexual harassment to report it anonymously and to facilitate HerasMap's community outreach and awareness, both HerasMap and the Canadian Development Organization, the International Development Research Center, it's also known by the initials IDRC, recognize the potential of the data collected through the map, through this crowdsourcing technique, that this data could be used in research and also knowledge production and being used in research to help then set policies to try to further combat sexual harassment. So what HerasMap did was they formed a research team, or they have a research unit as part of their organization now. And they developed a project that was funded by IDRC for 2 years on assessing the quality of the data collected through crowdsourcing by comparing it to the types of data on Harass Map that they also collected through traditional social science techniques such as in-depth interviews, questionnaires, and focus groups. So then they compared the information they were getting from these various data collecting techniques to see if crowdsourcing could provide new insights into the harassment or the harassment problem that other forms of research, social science techniques were overlooking. So the report was completed in 2014, and I brought a visual aid, so the report is available. You can get it on HerasMap's website, and some of the findings were also disseminated, as well as the report, in both English and Arabic at a one-day conference in Cairo back in June 22nd, 2014. So not only have several civil society organizations in Egypt have been successful in producing knowledge, but the two cases that I'm focusing on today have been particularly successful in disseminating knowledge or providing an educational service through the media, awareness campaigns, and community outreach. So going back to ECWR, in addition to its work on documenting the prevalence of public space harassment, has also worked early on in establishing itself as an expert for the media. So even as early as December 2005, its chair appeared on TV talk show call-in programs and gave interviews to local newspapers and magazines about the issue. Two popular Cairo radio stations, Nile FM, which is English programming, and Nagub FM, the Arabic programming, were very strong supporters of their anti-harassment campaign from the beginning. They aired and donated Arabic and English public service announcements in 2007 and 2008, and they periodically hosted call-in shows, inviting the staff of ECWR to discuss sexual harassment with people who called in or sent in messages. During the summer vacation months in 2008, ECWR also worked with the Youth and Broadcasting Station, Our Freedom, and also the Girls Only broadcasting station on public service announcements which targeted youth. ECWR was also successful in getting famous broadcasters and actors to record public service announcements, which both increased public awareness and also they were able to recruit additional volunteers. So as a result of these efforts, by 2008, ECWR did not even have to seek out the media to promote its information or activities. Rather, it was called upon for comment whenever a journalist or reporter was working on a story about harassment in Egypt, and the statistics from their 2008 study are still quoted even today in news stories about the harassment problem in Egypt. So if you ever come across the statistics that over 80% of Egyptian women are harassed regularly, or over 70% of the victims wear some form of the veil, or 98% of foreign women are harassed regularly, that's from ECWR's study. So an important outcome of the media outreach was that ECWR's framing and discussion of the different types of harassment that women faced in public spaces in Egypt became pervasive. Through textual analysis, we found that the organization's language and definitions for discussing harassment were adopted as we conducted a content analysis of a sample of local newspapers articles from 2007. So the data presented by ECWR at press conferences and Awareness Day events, which I'll talk a bit more about in a little bit, apparently had convinced journalists that sexual harassment was widespread and serious, and the incidents were not isolated or the woman's fault or the result of over-exaggeration or hypersensitivity. So ECWR also played an important role in educating the public and their own staff and volunteers on this issue through awareness events, regular meetings, and seminars and roundtables. So in terms of awareness events, ECWR raised consciousness of the harassment problem through art, music, and workshops at cultural centers, mainly at the El Sawi Culture Wheel and the Goethe Institute in Cairo from spring 2007 through 2009. And the audiences for these events included both men and women, but were mainly upper middle class Egyptians and expatriates. ECWR held multiple awareness days between 2007 and 2009. In 2009 and 2010, ECWR continued awareness days focusing on informal and lower socioeconomic neighborhoods in Greater Cairo, and it worked with local businesses and NGOs to garner financial and organizational support for them. ECWR volunteers also formed a team to meet weekly at the Goethe Institute in Cairo, starting in September 2007. So, taking the name of the campaign aimed at making our streets safer for everyone, the volunteers themselves invited professional speakers. They organized hands-on training sessions. The team also organized volunteer activities in Alexandria. Obviously, ECWR took educating the public and also educating their own staff and volunteers, and the volunteers themselves, developing themselves very seriously. And then finally, ECWR recognized the need to educate and lobby the Ministries of Tourism and Interior from the beginning of its campaign in order to get support. However, in July 2008, the Ministry of Tourism critiqued ECWR's second survey on harassment in Al Haram, the main government newspaper. The ministry stated that the survey showed sexual harassment was not a phenomena, but rather just a problem because ECWR's survey sample was limited. So in response, the ECWR leadership invited members of parliament and the Ministries of Tourism and Interior to panel discussions and seminars which aimed to lobby for legal and policy reforms. So the organization argued that sexual harassment threatened tourism, an important feature of Egypt's economy, at least before the uprising, and the panel and seminars set in motion policies for legal reform from governmental groups themselves. So in August 2008, a month after the Ministry of Tourism made its comments to the press, ECWR invited them, members of the Interior Ministry and Parliament, to a seminar entitled Sexual Harassment and Its Impacts on the Egyptian Economy. So the results of their study, Clouds in Egypt's Sky, highlighted the extent of harassment and its potential negative effects on tourism, foreign investment, and women's productivity in the labor force. And ECWR's leadership articulated the need for a law specifically criminalizing sexual harassment with appropriate sanctions and enforcement. So participants agreed that harassment was serious and that better laws and police enforcement were necessary. This seminar prompted the Ministry of Tourism to revise its views that it had expressed earlier, and subsequently the ministry generated its own public service announcements, or PSAs, on sexual harassment for Ramadan in 2008. The PSAs displayed how to respect tourists in order to promote repeat visits to Egypt, and it was clear that ECWR's presentation of the potential loss of tourist revenues at least resonated with the Ministry of Tourism. And then the Ministry of Interior also recognized the seriousness of sexual harassment due largely to ECWR's work and attending the same seminar. Prior to the campaign, the ministry published in the government newspaper a yearly report of sexual crimes as defined by the Penal Code, but the report did not keep statistics separately for categories of rape, assault, and various types of harassment, nor did the ministry make reports to judges on harassment problems. And then the ministry even attacked ECWR's activities related to sexual harassment on a radio talk show early on in their campaign. So this first-time meeting of high-level ministry officials with ECWR in 2008 provided an opportunity for ECWR to discuss with the ministry, making the safety and physical security of citizens a major priority. So while ECWR's campaign during the time of my research, which again was between 2006 and 2010, used more traditional tactics that civil society has used to educate volunteers, activists, and the general public, such as seeking traditional media exposure, organizing awareness events and conscious raising activities, and lobbying government institutions for legal and public policy reforms. Harass Map, from the beginning, based much of their activism in the online world and using social media. But with the caveat that their online activities would complement their on-the-ground, grassroots community outreach efforts to end the social acceptability of sexual harassment. So, as I mentioned earlier, one of the purposes of producing the map was to identify harassment hotspots that would guide where community outreach was needed. This approach changed over time with the recognition that crowdsourced data that relied solely on those who experienced harassment being willing to report it may not be an accurate representation geographically of where harassment is taking place or the rates of harassment. So I can explain more about that in the question and answer period if people are really interested. So instead, what they decided to do was that they would have community outreach teams of men and women, and now they have these teams in over 23 governorates, and they go into their own neighborhoods, and they try to convince bystanders of the unacceptability of harassment by countering myths and stereotypes and encouraging community intervention by encouraging the bystanders to speak out and intervene against harassment whenever they witness it. Bystanders are typically shopkeepers, police officers, doormen, restaurant and cafe owners, and the community mobilization teams use the stories that they collect from the map. So often when people report that they have been a victim of harassment, they give very detailed stories about exactly what happened and where it happened. And so now the community outreach or mobilization teams use these stories from that neighborhood to convince the residents that harassment does indeed happen in their own communities, and they could even point out to them where exactly in the neighborhood it happened and on what day. And then each team is led by a community captain who is responsible for organizing, coordinating, and training the team before community mobilization days. And then when bystanders agree or are convinced by the outreach team to stop accepting harassment, the community mobilization team gives them a harassment-free zone sticker to place in their shop, kiosk, or building to show that if they see harassment happening, they will intervene to stop it. So to give you an example of their online activism, I will discuss two of HerasMap's more recent campaigns. The first one, launched in November 2013, was the Get It Right campaign, and it organized a series of interlinked activities to expose the way sexual violence in all its forms is misnamed and to ridicule women-blaming excuses for sexual violence. So the campaign began with a 48-hour tweeting event in which the hashtag #GetItRight, which in Arabic, was used to circulate personal thoughts on sexual harassment. Furthermore, a series of caricatures and comics were widely disseminated through social media and also offline in the form of posters and stickers. So the official name of the campaign in Arabic was in the masculine form, so immediately confirming that the primary target audience was men. One set of caricatures featured the same male cartoon character in different situations with a caption that depicts and ridicules some of the typical behaviors displayed by male harassers. So for instance, one caricature said, "Happiness is great, but over a football match, not over a woman's body." So by having these kind of provocative cartoons and messages, it was a way to address men, and it was also what the campaign hoped to do was to expose the various forms of harassment commonly enacted, whether it was verbal, physical, involving facial features, or indecent exposure, and to openly confront and undermine them. So this approach can be directly contrasted to a more recent campaign, Don't Be Silent, which was launched in February 2014. This time, with the official Arabic name of the campaign being in the feminine form, most of the messages have targeted women. So they used Facebook and on Twitter the hashtag Don't Be Silent in Arabic. A series of images were circulated containing key action phrases that aimed to encourage women's confident and self-assured attitude toward harassment. So above each phrase was a speech bubble with more expansive sentences containing a diverse range of ideas related to how women can take an active approach in the fight against harassment. So one of the posters features the phrase, "I am not weak," with the speech bubble urging women to be their own guardians by taking up self-defense classes. And what unites these two campaigns is that they employ new technologies to challenge very old and deeply embedded gender perceptions, which have contributed to sexual harassment in Egypt, often being met with a silent indifference. While the first campaign removes blame from women and transfers it onto men's shameful actions and degrading perceptions of women, the second campaign seeks to empower women by encouraging them to break the cycle of silence and to stand up for their rights without feeling shame or blame. So in this context, the sustained success of HerasMap has relied heavily on its ability to generate relative ways of framing the issue that understand, engage with, and challenge dominant cultural norms, and using them as a basis to convey a sense of solidarity, common purpose, and shared grievance with those who have experienced sexual harassment. So before and after the January 25th, 2011 uprising, the political environment in which civil society has had to operate in Egypt has been difficult. For women's rights groups in particular, they have not only had to face authoritarianism, but neo-patriarchal regimes which have largely excluded women from formal politics, such as excluding, or that many of the committees that drafted the various constitutions were a majority of men. In the parliamentary elections, the majority of candidates who ran and won were men, and also the challenge of a relatively conservative society. But despite the obstacles, groups working to fight sexual harassment, including the two cases I've discussed today, have had success in educating the public, raising awareness, and framing this as an issue that it's an ongoing social problem. But they've also had success in breaking the taboo of discussing what had been a sensitive issue in public through media outlets such as TV and radio talk shows, as well as print in the various forms of social media. So to answer the question, does civil society matter in terms of education, how I've broadly defined it, and social change, I would emphatically say yes. So thank you for coming and listening. Let me see. Oh.
We're going to open discussion and questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand or a comment on what was been said, and the mic will come to you to hear you. And Dr. Rizzo will be able to reply back.
what women's rights have women not got in Egypt? I mean, human rights, women rights. What rights did not she got or get in Egypt from her point of view? What? Yes, yes, I mean this.
Okay. Oh, I mean, I guess I was looking at it in terms of the groups that are working on harassment are arguing that women can't freely walk in public spaces or feel comfortable taking public transportation. That's a violation of their human rights. In the workplaces, women are often discriminated against. They often aren't hired because employers assume they're just going to get married and have children, so they're not serious workers. Or even if they do get employed, they're not promoted and get raises, etc. Again, often under assumptions that they're not going to stick around to work. To run for political office, there's all kinds of obstacles. Women have a harder time getting people to help them with their campaigns. There are still images that women can't be political leaders because they're not rational. There were arguments that women can't be judges because they would make decisions based on emotion and not rationality. So I could go on and on with problems that women face here and in other places too. It's not unique to Egypt.
Hi, Dr. Helen.
Hi, Omar.
So I don't understand why there's so many categories for the types of sexual harassment. Why don't you just like let it make it be sexual harassment and that's it? I think there's like touching, phone calls, sexual photos, all this stuff. Who thought about making it so categorized, this Harass Map idea?
Okay, well, I think originally the earlier campaign by the Egyptian Center for Women's Rights came up with a lot of these categories, and then the people who started Harass Map, two of them came from the Egyptian Center for Women's Rights. And I think in the beginning, because sexual harassment wasn't really being defined, they wanted to make it serious that any action that makes women uncomfortable being in public space should be considered harassment. So even activities that you might consider are flirting, when it's done in the street by someone who, if I don't know the person, even saying things that like honey or you're beautiful or etc., if I don't know you on the street, to me that's not flattering. That could be scary because I don't know you. So I think that's what they wanted to emphasize, that even innocent acts, when it's done in public space, in the metro or microbus or on the street, if for a woman who doesn't know, if it's a stranger, it's unwelcome and could make you feel threatened. And of course, the more violent acts, I don't think people argue that touching or physical assaults or rape should not happen. I think the problem was the other end of the spectrum. People weren't viewing that as serious. It's like, oh, it's flirting, it's a compliment, why are you upset?
I have a comment and a question, okay? My comment is that I really like the idea, okay? But the findings are apparently clear for the Egyptian society. We all know that we suffer from the harassment and everybody knows about it. The problem is that we need it more practical. So if I found that and realized that this is a problem and we all suffer from, if they try to make workshops, so what is the sample that they choose in their workshops? Because if they choose some people from high classes or educated people, I don't think that they will cover the problem, okay? There will still be a problem because the problem appears more in the lower classes and uneducated people. So did they select people in their workshops that are going to make severe change in this issue, or they just choose some people who already know about it, who know that it's illegal to do it? So what kind of sample they choose?
Well, you're right. Especially the Egyptian Center for Women's Rights, when they had many of their early workshops and awareness days, they realized by having it at Sawi Center or these other cultural centers that it was very limited in who would come to such an event. So later on in their campaign, at least right before the revolution, they were trying to go to youth centers in middle and lower class neighborhoods and hold campaigns in informal neighborhoods and hold, trying to have an attractive theme. I mean, it's hard to make sexual harassment to get people to come, but to have music and art and discuss the issue through art, even in neighborhoods, not in Zamalek or Doi, but going into informal neighborhoods and going into middle-class neighborhoods and trying to hold events there as well. So to try to reach a wider audience. But you are right, if you're only talking to one segment of the population, how far is your message going to go?
If you please, I'll ask, what's the difference? What's the difference between women rights in Arab countries and the foreign countries, according to your point of view?
Oh, that you're asking, are women's rights different in different countries? Yes. I mean, I would argue that, of course, each country and place may have very specific issues for that place, but I think in terms of general issues, it does seem like worldwide, women still have a hard time getting into politics or having a political voice, still have a hard time when they're trying to enter the workforce, getting hired, getting promoted, and that sexual violence or domestic abuse happens everywhere in the world as well. So I think there are some issues that cut across countries, and then there are some issues that may be very specific to a particular place or a country like Egypt or South Africa or Brazil.
How can teachers and schools contribute in our goal? How can they make their role? Thank you.
I know both ECWR and HerasMap have tried to train teachers and to also make recommendations to the Ministry of Education, and it's been very difficult because they don't want, or if they feel that outsiders are trying to intervene with the national educational system, they don't want outsiders to intervene. I know ECWR would have off-site trainings for teachers, like they don't go into the schools, but of course it's only going to attract teachers who are willing to go someplace else to be trained, that it's not part of, if it was sponsored by the school, you would get more participation, but since the ministry won't let them go into the schools, they have done some off-site training and trying to develop educational materials for children to talk about child abuse and harassment in age-appropriate ways, but it's very difficult to get the ministry to, approve the curriculum. I know HerasMap has had more success at the university level. They just helped Cairo University write a anti-sexual harassment policy of what would happen if students or faculty or staff are harassed at the university. But you're right, it needs to start young, but the challenge is the Ministry of Education.
Okay. My question is about, now we talked about sexual rights for women or sexual violence. Mm-hmm. What about other taboos like LGBTs, atheists, agnostics? How could the civil society contribute/educate to this?
Oh, sorry, what was, instead of sexual violence, what was the other example you gave? I didn't hear you.
LGBT rights, lesbian, gays, bisexual, transsexuals, atheists, agnostics. other taboos, whatever it is, how the civil society could contribute and educate and how to affect on these kind of taboos or issues.
Well, this goes back to my comment about how right now, I mean, not just right now, but that civil society in general is facing a very, tough, difficult political environment. And I think some of the taboo issues you just brought up, it's very difficult right now for groups to organize to try to work for the rights of the groups, atheists, transsexuals, etc. I think the Egyptian Initiative for Personal Rights is one group that has taken on these extremely controversial issues. And they have written various reports about discrimination against religious minorities and the lack of freedom to even declare that if you don't want to have a religious faith. But I think there's more work to be done. It's just right now a very challenging political environment, particularly for the set of issues you just brought up.
I am Bahir Ngomi, lecturer of microbiology, Faculty of Science. I'd like to thank you about your interesting lecture, and let me ask you about the main or basic role of women in developing a process and social developing society. Thank you.
Sure.
I'll repeat again? Okay. I would like to the main role of women in educational and social development in our society. Rule.
Okay. Since a lot of what I teach and the work I've done has been on about social development and incorporating women into the development, many in the field see that women often play three very important roles: a role in reproduction, of being a mother, educating her children, and productive role in doing paid work, whether it's informal work or joining the formal labor force, and also as this community manager role when in many countries, not just here, when the state can no longer fund health services or educational services, women often step in and volunteer to help raise awareness about immunization, let's say, in a neighborhood, and try to get women to take their babies to the health clinic to get immunized or provide tutoring, etc. So that a lot of the development field recognize that women are doing all of these things, and how can women be more involved, but more involved in a just way? Let me put it that way.
Yes. Really, thanks a lot for your lecture. It's very good, and I like it a lot. But we have something here in Middle East. I don't know if you have an idea about it or not, which is religion. Before you speak about education and about anything, you have to fix a big problem, which is the religion allow, or let us say not just allow, it's encourage the men to insult women, to beat her, to divorce her, to do anything. I don't think we will success by education, by anything, before we fix this problem, essentially. I know you are out of this subject, I know that, but for everybody here, I have to tell this comment. I'm sorry for, yeah.
No, I appreciate your comment that religion is highly influential, and hopefully there are ways to interpret teachings in certain ways.
Really, I didn't speak about one religion. I'm talking about whole religions insult women.
No, I agree that the major religions are very patriarchal. You are right.
Okay, so, well, I have this comment that usually we have these kind of activities of awareness, changing some kind of internal policies and so on. It happens only on the level of educated people, and not just educated. We're talking about educated and cultured and civilized and having, well, so there must be a way, because most of the cases that happen when it comes to harassment, when it comes to such violent activities, it happens usually on the less educated level. So what I'm asking here, what is the role of the civil society in transferring such activities of raising awareness and so on from the educated level to the less educated level? So is there something that can be done to transfer this kind of activity downgrade it to the more, let me say, the less educated and the more common backgrounds and societies?
No, I mean, I think civil society does have a responsibility when it tries to take on a certain issue or social problem that to reach all parts of the society. And you're right, there are challenges to reach maybe poorer neighborhoods or lower class neighborhoods, and that it's much easier to reach those who are educated, etc. But I think it's still their responsibility, and I know that in terms of the field of community development, one of the methods they try to use is what's called participatory action research, which is working with the communities, whether they're, you know, middle, lower class, to help them define what the problems are and try to help them solve it together through research, and then coming up based on research solutions, but trying to do it together and not just also coming from outside and imposing what we might think is the solution as well.
Okay, I'm graduate from the Faculty of Archaeology Egyptology section, and I'm working as the database developer. Now I'm 30 years old, and I feel that my job does not meet my ambitions. So how can I get a job, meet my qualifications, or meet my ambitions through education?
Sorry, I had a hard time hearing the question. Okay. Sorry, we had a hard time hearing you.
Okay. I have written the question. Okay. I am graduated from the Faculty of Archaeology Egyptology section, and I'm working as a database developer. Now I am 30 years old, and I feel that my job does not meet my ambitions. So how can I get a job, meet my ambitions through the education?
I missed the last part of the question.
So this is a problem in Egypt. I learned the thing, and I'm working in another thing.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I've moved out of my area of expertise. I mean, I know that there are problems with people going on, especially for university education and majoring in one thing and can't find a job and have to find another job. And this mismatch, I know, can often be frustrating. But I think at least the philosophy of AUC has been, if you get a liberal arts education, then no matter where you end up, what you've learned is going to be useful. And regardless of if you major in sociology and go into business, that knowing sociology will be useful. But I know training in archaeology, I know is a very specific type of skill, and that wanting to work in that field and not being able to is extremely frustrating, but it's not my area of expertise, the question, sorry.
Thank you very much for your enlightening lecture on the rights of women in Egypt. I had a question to ask in this respect. To what extent should you think that efforts should be taken on both the formal and informal levels in order to increase people's awareness and actually reach an action plan so we could put an end to this societal issue? Thank you.
Well, I think what is the challenge about civil society is that it is various independent groups or some relatively independent groups, and they don't always work together even when they're working on the same issue. So I think that has been the challenge, that in trying to solve a social problem, whether it's poverty or harassment or discrimination against a certain group, that one group is doing a little bit here, one group is doing a little bit here, and they may not always try to combine resources or work together, or the way the funding is structured in the Middle East, people are, different groups are competing for the same pool of funding. Right now it's not structured in a way of maybe trying to encourage groups to work together, perhaps, to address an issue. So I think the way civil society is structured promotes this kind of fragmentation, because you don't have some overarching institution trying to coordinate everyone's work, for better or for worse.
First, I would like to thank you for the enriched, informative presentation. My question regarding impact measurement. So we all agreed upon that all anti-harassment groups, they did a lot of effort during the last couple of years to raise the issue about sexual harassment against women. But what about, did they, like a group like Harass Map, did they start any measurement tools to measure their impact on the public? And what came out about this process? And if they didn't, so personally, do you think it's important to start and establish a measurement for this process? And what is the tools for that measurement? Thank you.
Sure. I think Harass Map was trying to develop something with IDRC, the organization that funded the research, to do kind of impact assessment, and they might be in the process of doing it right now. So I don't know yet if they have results yet, because they've only been around since 2010. So I think for them it's pretty new. But I know for like the Egyptian Center for Women's Rights, I think they do have to do some reporting and impact assessment, especially for when donors give them money, that these international organizations have the measurements, et cetera, that they want different groups to meet. But yeah, the question is that effective or not to have these impact assessments? I guess I go back to my other answer that everything seems fragmented. So even if you do an impact assessment and your little group did a great job, we did achieve what we wanted to achieve, more girls are going, staying in school or whatever the goal is, it's still, because these organizations are small and not coordinated, they're only going to have a certain amount of impact. So, but I mean, I think having them there is better than not having them there. So that would be my answer.
Hi. I just have a question. I think everybody noted the systematic strategy of the state or of Sisi to adopt women situations or to adopt women issues. Do you think it's a part of building the state new nationalism, or do you think that it's really in favor of women's rights? I mean, like, how could you see the women situation in the context of the current political ramifications? Thank you.
Well, I mean, I think In an ideal situation, and it's not limited just to Egypt, in order to solve large problems like poverty or women's rights, etc., I mean, you do need the state involved. Because the state, if it has the capacity, has the organizational strength and the resource strength to kind of be the overarching, trying to see the big picture and working with civil society to solve problems. I mean, in other countries, I think like Sweden and Norway and the Netherlands, there is a healthy working relationship between the state and civil society, and sometimes even the private business sector as well. So I think that's also the challenge for Egypt of is the state willing to take on some of these big issues and work with civil society on them.
Last questions I have. I was just want to ask about if there any solution to this widespread problem. It spreads all over the world. There is no country that had no like in Egypt, I think. We also afraid of our mothers, sisters, and we I just leave my faculty, our college, to go with my mom or my sister to any way to protect her. How can we deal it? There is any role for our government to do, or to any NGO to face this problem? Thank you.
Oh, so asking if there's a role for the government and NGOs to solve the problem?
Yes, NGOs and our government and everybody in our society.
Okay, I mean, I guess going back to the other question about the state, I mean, there is a role for the police to, and I mean, this isn't just a problem in Egypt, that the police often aren't trained, or you need special training to deal with someone who's been a victim of rape or sexual harassment or sexual assault. That there is special training that's done for officers who deal with these types of crimes. So I think that would be something that's needed here, and the general training of how should police officers treat victims versus the criminal. I mean, so there's the police have a role to play in providing safety and security, but also I think, yeah, as we as individuals to learn how other people would like to be treated and feel safe in public space. And I think Harass Map's tact of trying to get the bystanders to take a stand and intervene when they see unacceptable behavior is the role that also individuals can play in solving the problem, and hopefully NGOs can play the role of trying to educate people about why we have these problems and the reasons behind them. So I think it has to come from, the solution has to come from various places and levels. Sure.
One more.
Yeah, we can have two more.
How do you think the Egyptian get this bad culture? I mean, back in at least 30 or 20 years, there were no this bad happens. This bad culture was there in the Egyptian. This how the اكتسبوا هذه العادات؟ ازاي هم اكتسبوا العادات دي؟ ان هي ما كانتش موجوده على مدار 30 سنه.
لا هي موجوده هي في العالم كله. His question is, do you know if how the Egyptians acquired these bad habits?
Oh.
I mean,
when? From when ولا from where? لا.
مرأة جدا. من 30 سنة أو من أكثر من 30 سنة.
The research, he's saying that these things did not show up before 30 years. So how they acquired during the last 30 years? If you do have an answer for that. as far as I understand, that they were existing, but on a lower level probably, or lower number, and it was not exposed. This is personal. I don't know if this is right.
I mean, I would add also, I mean, with the growing, population growth, you have more crowded areas with people hanging out, more opportunity to do these kind of behaviors and not be punished. I think that the lack of punishment is part of it. Having opportunity, crowded spaces is part of it. I mean, some people say that like economic problems where men and women can't, fulfill the duties they would like to fulfill, get married, have jobs, have children, so that people are frustrated. So there's various explanations now. I'm not sure which one is the exact right one. Maybe it's a combination of all of them for why it didn't seem to be such a severe problem 30 years ago and why in the last 30 years it has become increasingly a problem. But these are some of the factors that I've come across.
I have a question. Here, please. Okay. Actually, I believe in the effective role of NGOs in societies. I myself is a member in one, but we face a serious problem, which is that other NGOs don't have the pure intentions of helping people, really helping people. So the problem is that there is a falsified image or a very bad view about most of the NGOs in Egypt. Okay, how can we fight, from your experience, how can we fight this or avoid this bad view about NGOs? How can we try to change this view and make it more effective, make people believe us more and trust us?
Yeah, I mean, continuing to work in a way that you are sincere, that you are trying to use your resources to help the most people as possible, to show results, I guess not to show favoritism. So to try to be as professional as possible would be my recommendation, yeah.
Yes, the last one. Yes.
I think that the problem is not in the harasser or the harassment should stop by punishment. I think it's the culture. Men think the most of men in Egypt think that the woman is not a human being. It's like a subject or product, or she is treated like that. Women themselves think in this way, and they are raised up on these bases. You live with us till you get up and marry. The marriage itself is not the social relationship that's supposed to be. It's like a business deal in Egypt. So what's the real solution to the problem? I think it's we have to not do anything wrong because it's wrong, not that we are afraid of the punishment. It's the way of thinking, I think.
Well, I mean, I think attitudes are already starting to change with larger social changes in Egypt and in the region and around the world as people get more educated, as women enter the workforce, hopefully getting more women into politics, changing this attitude that men are somehow superior and women are inferior, that women can be as rational as men. Men also have emotions too, that there has to be a change in thinking about that men's roles and women's roles right now I think for some groups, they see it as very rigid. The man is the breadwinner, the leader, and women are the nurturers and they take care of the children and somehow are weaker or are not physically and mentally as strong. I mean, I agree, all that has to change as well in order to help solve the problem of harassment, of discrimination in the workplace, of the difficulties of women, you know, getting elected to political office. I think all these things are intertwined. And also some studies have shown that often people don't change their attitudes first. If they're punished for something and forced to do something, the change in attitude follows later. I think workplace harassment in the United States, this is what they discovered. If they started punishing employers or anyone who is in a position of power for harassing someone below them, and once the punishment started happening, people stopped, even if they still wanted to do it. And then later on, the attitudes adjusted to the so some studies show that changing the behavior needs to come first and the attitudes follow.
If you please, I have a question. What's the role of educators and researchers regarding women rights?
Actually, it was asked, but on a different level, which was what's the role of the teachers? Now it's the role of educators in general. So it's
I mean, I think it is, a huge responsibility of anyone who, whether it's teaching children, teaching university students, doing research, trying to educate the general public, of trying to get the information out there about the inequalities, and that, at least, I guess me being a feminist, I don't think the inequalities are justified, that women are just as capable as men, and we have to keep pushing that.
Thank you, Dr. Rizzo, for this fantastic event.
Thank you.
Actually, the topic was tackled from many different aspects. We took the part of education as main source of changing, and then we took also the other part, which is the civil society role, which you explained on a